Well, Merry Christmas to all of you, and I'm recording my homily for Christmas, which happened to fall on Sunday this year. And just want to offer just a few reflections for your own Christmas. I know that Christmas Day is already past, and there's the huge temptation to just kind of move on now that Christmas Day is past. But remember, as Catholics, we celebrate Christmas Day for 8 days, right? We call it the Christmas octave, or the octave of Christmas. And so for 8 days we celebrate it. So the fact that you're hearing this today or watching this, maybe during the Christmas week, is a good thing. You're still celebrating the Christmas season, right? On Christmas evening, or I should say on Christmas Eve, the evening, I brought all the kids right around here, and I was talking to them, and just kind of going through with the different characters that we have here in the creche, in the nativity scene, and just asking the kids questions about it. And turns out the kids told me that the donkey and the cow actually have names, so that's good, right? So apparently the donkey is named Fred, okay? And the cow's hard to kind of see because he's up here on this ledge. He's more like a mountain goat, but he's a cow. And he's right up here, and apparently his name is Johnny. So I didn't know that. Anyway, so I'm talking to the kids about this, and I asked the kids how come the donkey, apparently Fred, why he's up on this ledge. Just, I thought maybe the kids had an insight into that. And one of the kids says, well, maybe he's up there resting. It's kind of like a bunk bed, so maybe he's up there just resting. I thought, well, that makes sense. He's really tired. He was the one carrying our Blessed Mother, right? We kind of assumed that. And so he's up there resting. And then I kept, just asking questions. And then one girl, she said, but maybe he's up there just kind of watching. Just keeping an eye on things. Kind of like protecting. Some animals really do have that kind of intuitive sense when something's not right, or when somebody's really vulnerable, that they kind of come in and do the protecting thing. And so she thought maybe the donkey was doing that. And I thought that was kind of interesting. That was a good insight into what I'm going to talk about the nativity scene here and about Jesus' birth. So as we kind of went around and kept going around, there was a point where I asked him who this person was, right? At this point, I'm with the Spanish Mass, and so I got a different group of kids. And so I pointed to the shepherd, and I said, so who is that? And one of the girls, I was expecting her to say, well, that's a shepherd, one of the shepherds who was out in the field. And she didn't say that. She said, oh, that's David. And it kind of caught me off guard because the readings for Christmas evening or Christmas Mass at night, the Gospel, is about how Mary and Joseph are going to the city of David, right? And you remember the story of David, even though David lived, how long did he live? Like 700 years before Jesus. Where was David? You remember the story? So him and his brothers are shepherds, and Israel, or I should say Judea, is looking for a new king. And so they come into Bethlehem to David's family looking for a new king. And so they line up all his brothers. Now, he wasn't there because he was the youngest. And so they had him stay out in the fields with the sheep in Bethlehem, in the area of Bethlehem, while they picked a new king for Judea. But it turns out, the story, they didn't want any of the brothers. They wanted David, the most unlikely of the brothers. And so the little girl was saying, that's David. And that's genius, because here we have the new king who's being born in Bethlehem, who's taking the reins, if you will, from David, who was a shepherd in those same fields. And perhaps, he was even born in the same cave where David used to be hundreds of years before as a shepherd? I don't know, but I thought it was pretty neat, right? Just those connections. Have you ever been vulnerable? Have you ever needed something that you couldn't possibly provide to people around you? Have you ever had to beg? And when I say beg, I don't mean, beg your parents to borrow the car. I mean cardboard sign beg, right? Where you had to receive help from strangers and maybe even had to beg. Now, I would say most of us probably have never had to do that. Maybe we've gotten down on our knees a few times and not known what to do, but to be brought down that low, right? Remember last week I talked about Joseph. Joseph, who is looking for a place for his wife to be born, and everybody's saying no. And he had to absolutely felt like the worst husband in the world. And so he's there begging. But this is the beauty of this. This is the beauty of how God works. While Joseph feels like he's the worst husband in the world, God is so proud of him. He's so proud of him because he's willing in this moment of complete vulnerability to do whatever he needed to do out of love for his wife and for her boy, for her child, the Savior of the world. And this is how God works. He comes in a manner so humble. And in some ways, he demands that of us, to be so humble so that his power can radiate through that. I often tell the people, there is no other religion in the world that teaches or that believes that God came into the world in such a vulnerable way as a baby who needs everything provided. Every last thing. And as he comes in, you see immediately, you have King Herod who wants to kill him. He's a total stranger. He can't even find a place to be born. And that's so God's power can raise him up and raise Joseph up and Mary and the shepherds and the Magi and Fred and Johnny. But to raise us all up. And so he demands of that moment where we have nothing, because then God can work purely through us, right? Or whatever manner he wishes to work. 9 years ago, I was assigned in Chehalis, Washington. And that winter, they received a horrific rainstorm where in the foothills just west of Chehalis, they received almost 20 inches of rain over the course of a week. And there was mudslides on Highway 6, there was flooding. And the flooding, you may remember seeing pictures of it in the newspaper, the flooding completely covered Interstate 5. There was one picture that was very famous where there was a guy kayaking over the interstate, because the interstate was a good 5 or 6 feet underwater. And so it was an incredible flooding that had happened that winter. And so for about 6 months, we spent helping families. Many, many families had had their homes submerged or flooded. And so we spent a lot of time helping families. Well, a couple weeks, maybe it had been a month after the flooding, it was Christmas. And on Christmas Eve, I was in the rectory. And I was getting my homily ready for the Christmas masses. And I was so looking forward to that afternoon because I had a couple hours where I could just sit with Jesus and I could just pray about it and come up with a homily. And as you know, I always have my little notepads, right? So I'm there with a pen, sitting in front of the Blessed Sacrament and just meditating. And right as I was sitting down to pray, the doorbell rang. And so I was a little upset with that because I wanted to prepare my homily. And so I go to the door in a not very good mood. And I'm thinking to myself, as a bad priest, I'm thinking to myself, I'm just going to get rid of these people, right? I just got to get them out. Well, it's a young man, and he's at the door, and he says, Father, our house was flooded, and for the last couple of weeks we've been in a motel, and we're out of money. I mean, we are out of money. And there were many, many families that were in his situation. And he says they're kicking us out today. We have no more time in the motel. And so he was asking for some help. And I said, it's Christmas Eve. The office is closed. We had these vouchers for the motel for these families, and I couldn't get into the safe. I didn't have that ability to do that, and I was just like, sorry, I can't help you, But I said, if you come back in like 2 or 3 days, when the office is open again, we can help you. So he was like, okay, all right, I don't know what he was going to do, sleep in his car or something. So I had him write his name down on my little homily notepad with his phone number so that I could call him, in case something happened or, maybe I could help him. And so he started to leave, and I closed the door, and I looked down at the notepad, and I looked at his name. His name was Joseph. His name was Joseph. And so, I'm not the brightest bulb in the chandelier. It took me a second, but it's like, wait a minute, his name is Joseph. And it's Christmas Eve. Now, what I didn't tell you was, he was holding a little baby boy, right? His son. And his wife was waiting in the car when he was talking to me. And I'm thinking, oh no, I just turned away Joseph on Christmas Eve, right? This is like posadas, the Hispanic tradition of going door to door, imitating Mary and Joseph, and everybody saying, nope, there's no room for you. And here I have a man with his little boy and his wife, and they need a place to stay on Christmas Eve, and I say, sorry. So I didn't really want to go to hell for doing that. So I ran out that door and I chased him down, and I said, look, Joseph, we'll find you a place to stay. Can you imagine being that dad? Right? Just the humility. And he probably just felt like the worst father in the world because he couldn't provide his wife and his little boy a place to stay on Christmas night, right? He must have felt horrible. And then to have his own priest say, sorry, I can't help you. But in that beautiful humility that he was doing for his family, God's power could work. And it worked a little bit in my life too. I still got a long ways to go, but it worked a little bit. And so the power of that kind of love, we think of power in our world, we think of bombs and bullets and guns, and that is power. There is power there, but it is always instilling its power. It's always implementing its power through fear. Now, sometimes, given our broken world, it is necessary. If we're going to defend innocent life, sometimes governments have to do that, even to accomplish something that's as good as defending innocent life. But it's always out of fear, nonetheless. And so God works much differently, right? Our God comes vulnerable, the exact opposite of having power, so that the power of love, which is more powerful than fear, even though it may not always seem that way, it is far more powerful. It obliterates fear when there is true love. But in that absolute humility of God entering into the world in that manner, He's showing us that path of true love and of His power. It's never really our power. We never own love. We simply become ones who share God's love when our hearts are open. It's powerful. I had mentioned a while back that on my sabbatical last summer, I spent a week with my brother in Germany, and we went to see this one castle, and right next to the castle was an ice cave. And to get to the ice cave, you had to take a tram like straight up the mountain. And if you've ever seen Lord of the Rings and you see the cave where Gollum is dwelling, that's what it was like. Because we were way over the tree line and it was just rocks. That's all it was. And so you go into the cave and there's a tour guide and you have to pay and all those things. And so as we're going up, I have this flashlight, right? I have one of those LED flashlights, going to light up everything. And I was so proud of myself, I came prepared with a flashlight. And so we're getting to the entrance, and we see the tour guide there, and there's the sign that says, no flashlights. All right? You can't use flashlights. And I'm thinking to myself, well, why? Right? We're going into a cave. So I thought maybe they had lights. Maybe they had electricity up there and lights in the cave. And so they don't want you shining your flashlight around or whatever. And but then the tour guide comes to us and he says, okay, so this is what we're going to use for light. And so he brings out this like lantern for coal miners, right? It's 1 candle power. Ours wasn't even 1 candle power. It was like a little tiny flame, and it barely shed any light at all. And then he said, and because the group is so big, you're going to have to share. And so not even everyone got 1 candle power. Now, as we're going in, I'm getting really, really mad because I have a flashlight that's like 300 candle power or however much it was. And so it's like, why can't I use my flashlight? So as we go in, it is really dark and I can't see anything, right? And I have to stick with somebody, the person next to me who actually has the lantern. And it's only bright enough to light up the steps. So as we get going, the tour guide pulls out this, whatever it was like a magnesium thing. It was almost like a welding rod. And he lights it up. And it's lighting up really bright. And so I thought, oh, okay, that's good. But the way he's waving it around, we can't really see a whole lot still because he's using it to see where he's going. And so I'm still frustrated, and I'm talking to my brother, and I'm saying, I think I'm going to pull my flashlight out. I think I'm going to use my flashlight. And he's like, no, don't you dare. Because, I was going to break the rules. So we get going up a little bit farther, and the tour guide kind of runs ahead of us. And the whole time I'm just mad, right? I'm not enjoying it. I'm just kind of mad. And so he runs up ahead, and then he starts taking pieces of his magnesium rod thing, and he starts lighting it and then throwing it behind different ice sculptures, the pillars of ice that were there. And he's throwing them over there, and and then as we stand back, it lights up so beautifully. I was thinking to myself, wow, just a couple more of those lights and it's like a cathedral. It's like a cathedral of ice that God made, right? We're simply there to admire it. Now, I thought our tour guide in some ways afterwards, after I was reflecting on it, and I learned a little bit of humility, he's kind of like God. And so God sometimes only gives us 1 candle power of light. And it's really dim, and we think to ourselves, well, by golly, I've got this flashlight that's so much brighter. I know better. I can do this, right? And so we pull out our flashlight and we begin wandering down our own path. And we think we're doing good, but we no longer really need God. We no longer are a beggar, if you will. We no longer need, in some ways, anybody else either. And so married couples stop praying together. Families stop praying. People stop coming into church just to talk with their best friend, Jesus, because he's no longer their best friend, because they're too busy trying to do it themselves. And they slowly but surely begin to think that they have everything they need. But at some point, the batteries go dead, right? Now, there's you with your one candle power coal miner lantern, but it's all from God. And so you may not have enough light to get more than 1 or 2 steps, but that's the beauty of it, is you have to rely on God, who is kind of like the tour guide with His light. And your light simply came from His light. It's simply an image of it. And when you trust Him, like Joseph, and obviously Mary, when you trust Him, there are those moments when God lights everything up, like a cathedral of ice in a cave, a dark cave. And then the person with the flashlight, when the batteries go dead, begins to scramble in the dark. And then they see your faint little light. And they come to you and they say, "Can I follow you? Can I relearn how to trust, how to have faith?" Now I don't know this, but I think one of the reasons why when we were in the cave, they did not give a lantern to everybody is because it forced us to stay together. We needed each other. And so that's the very nature of the Catholic Church. That's the beauty of our faith. We always speak of us being a family because we need each other. We can't do it on our own. It's not just me and Jesus, but it's Jesus and everybody whom He loves. And so this vulnerability is a very, very important thing, because not only does Jesus come into the world vulnerable and showing us the need to trust, and I know you can't see it right now, but just to my right is the crucifix, which you've seen in many of my homilies. I almost always do my homilies with Jesus behind me on the crucifix. And if you think of another image of somebody so vulnerable, He allowed Himself to be killed in capital punishment, to be executed, so completely vulnerable. He comes into the world that way and He leaves the world that way, because that is the nature of God's power. That's how God works. And that's the model for us. He's our mentor. He's our shepherd, right? He's our shepherd. Now, the part of this that I think is even harder for us to believe, and even harder for the world to believe, and yet is far more beautiful, is the fact that by God doing this, He's showing us that in some ways He needs to be vulnerable with us. Because that's how He receives love. God did not create us just to give love. God thrives on receiving our love. He thrives on being our brother, being our father. He thrives on that. And there is no other religion in the world that even dares to believe that God desires to be so close to us. I feel like a hypocrite because I struggle with these things. I struggle to be vulnerable. I think this is one of the reasons why I love St. Francis of Assisi so much, because he's one of the few people that just did it so joyfully. And he overcame his own weaknesses, his materialistic weaknesses, his desire for money and partying and all those things that he had as a young man. And he becomes this man who's so willing to be a beggar for God. So willing to say he has nothing so that he can always be there to receive and to give back to God the one thing that he's received most purely, that love. And I don't know if you knew this, but St. Francis of Assisi was the one who came up with the idea of a church or a community putting together a creche, putting together a nativity scene. And I think it's because he understood. He really understood the beauty of what had happened that night in the Holy Family, in the world when our Savior came to us. All right, God bless. Merry Christmas.